Now, if you're still here listening to me, or you just started listening to me, we're going to be talking about the Philadelphia experiment. And the Philadelphia experiment was a Navy ship, the USS, where did it go here? The USS Eldridge in 1943, October 28th, that disappeared because of a force field they put up around it. And there's hundreds of accounts of this situation occurring. Now, the first part of this was the invisible ship. Over the decades, the Philadelphia experiment has become part of urban myth, part legend, and totally fascinating for conspiracy theorists all over the world. The truth is, the U.S. Navy ship was working on a type of invisibility technology. They wanted to reduce and bend the magnetic fields of their ships to avoid triggering mines and torpedoes. And yes, the research was conducted at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The USS Timmerman was the site of several experiments relating to this project in the 1940s. It was outfitted with a high-frequency generator that created discharges to disrupt the magnetic field. These experiments definitely happened. And this is one part of the story that is absolutely fact. But as for the rest, time will tell. So the first part of this that we can dive deeper into was Morris Jessup. All right? Now, until Morris Jessup, the Philadelphia experiment was just a story. It was a whispered legend, a rumor, a bit of a horror story told by people to warn us against the might of the government and all the secret projects the U.S. military was carrying out at the time. But then Jessup wrote a book, The Case for the UFO, which came out in 1955. Shortly thereafter, he started receiving letters about electromagnetic forces, Einstein, and secret Navy projects. That's when Jessup's mysterious letter writer spoke about the Philadelphia experiment. His 1959 death was ruled as a suicide, and Jessup had become a legendary figure in the complicated tale of the Philadelphia experiment. The next person to talk about here is Carl Allen. Using the alias Carlos Edlenda, Carl Allen wrote a lengthy description of the Philadelphia experiment as he witnessed it. He also says that the mysterious person behind the letters sent to Morris Jessup, or he was also the person who wrote the letters to Morris Jessup. Allen served abroad and aboard the USS Andrew Forsyth, and he also saw Eldridge suddenly appear out of nothingness, or the Eldridge, which is the ship, appear out of nothingness on October 28th, 1943. One moment, there was an empty water before him, and the next moment, a Navy ship replaced with all its splendor. Many considered Allen to be the originator of the tale of the Philadelphia experiment. The captain of the USS Andrew Forsyth, William Dodge, says that neither his crew witnessed anything weird in Norfolk, and that further, his ship wasn't in Norfolk at the same time that Eldridge was there in October. Allen had since been called an insane person with severe mental issues and completely discredited by skeptics. Fact checkers of the time. The first experiment. So the Philadelphia experiment was actually not a single event, it was two. The very first occurred in July 22nd, 1943 in Philadelphia. This was the day the USS Eldridge disappeared out of the port and vanished, literally, into thin air. Moments later, the ship reappeared in its spot, seemingly undisturbed. According to witnesses who claimed to have seen it all happen, the ship was gone only moments. A couple of heartbeats, a few blinks, and suddenly, it was sitting right back in the water where it started. Where did it go? What happened to the ship? That is the second part of the Philadelphia experiment. And here it is, the second experiment. The Philadelphia experiment was a two-part process. It's not good enough to simply make a ship disappear. After all, no. You've got to be able to do something with it. And according to the second part of the story, the Philadelphia experiment, the Navy did something with it. Because when the Eldridge disappeared in Philadelphia in July, it appeared somewhere else later. To be specific, the ship was seen 300 miles away in Norfolk, Virginia. Witness reports claimed that all of a sudden, the Eldridge materialized in the waters around Norfolk. It was seen for only moments, then it vanished again, and the date was October 28th, 1943. Not only had the ship perfected the disappearing ship act, they clearly figured out how to move a ship while invisible, too. Now, number 10, a part of this, has to do with Albert Einstein. Einstein's unifield theory was a theory that was dreamed up by Einstein and is cited as the technology behind the Eldridge's disappearing act. Einstein spent the last years of his life on the unified field theory, a way to combine electromagnetism with gravity into one theory. He said he could not be content with the assumption that these two distinct fields are completely independent of each other. However, science says that Einstein could never prove his theory. He lectured on the topic during his Nobel Peace speech in 1923 and had already begun working on it back then. He worked on the theory for about 30 years until the end of his life, but the theory was never completed. Einstein was still working on it up until the day he died. While on his deathbed, he asked for his notes to be brought to him so he could look over his research. But did he solve the problem at last? Or did other scientists secretly step in and complete his work? Accepted science says no. The physicists are still working on Einstein's yet unsolved theory. Believers say yes, the Navy found a way to crack the scientific code, and they started working on it as a way to use in its practical application in the 40s. Interesting. Now, the ninth part of this series says that something did happen after the Philadelphia experiment, which many have pointed to as evidence of bizarre going-ons with the Navy at the time. According to witness testimony, urban legend have it, and even a newspaper account from the day, 2 sailors vanished into thin air during a bar fight. The bar fight has become the legend of the Philadelphia experiment, but there's a problem. There's just one single original source for that story. The tale of the bar fight was one of the many incidents detailed in the letters sent to Jessup by Allen, and this entire event was never confirmed by any legitimate publication or even a second credible witness. So sounds like horseshit. The side effects. Now it says sailors disappearing into thin air was one of the unfortunate side effects of the Philadelphia experiment. According to believers, the Navy discovered that rendering a ship and its crew invisible is actually extremely damaging to the human mind, which is why some say the technology was abandoned. The Philadelphia experiment was likely actually a failure. It's said that several members of the crew went insane following the experiment, and that was even worse than disappearing into nothingness. Legend holds that some sailors were fused with the ship when it rematerialized in Philadelphia. Some became violently ill, and the others had their minds mangled beyond repair. Now, the next part of this is about Al Bielek, which the story of the Philadelphia experiment gets really weird from, because now is the time that we introduce him, also known as Ed Cameron. He was with his brother on one day in 1943 when he dove into the waters around the ship. He saw that the effects of the Philadelphia experiment firsthand because he was teleported into the future. Wow, this shit's getting crazy. Bielek has shared his story widely. According to him, he and his brother Duncan ended up in the year 2137. They were later returned to the year 1983 after a period of 2 years. He said he was a part of the CIA's Montauk Project. He has written 2 books about his experiences. Skeptics dismiss Bielek as a crank and a crazier, an attention-seeking liar. Okay? Didn't give us much information about that, but interesting. Now here's the official story. The Navy categorically denies that the Philadelphia experiment ever even happened. Officially, no experiments were ever carried out on the Eldridge. And yes, the Eldridge was in Norfolk, Virginia on July 22nd, and in Philadelphia the same day. That's because the Navy had access to a channel that is unused by other ships, they said. And they could make a journey in just about 6 hours. At least 30 hours faster than the merchant ships traveling between the same 2 ports. Navy says they cannot make ships disappear. Never made a ship disappear. And the story is just a weird jumble of legends and theories mixed in with the real fact that they were working on technology to render their ships invisible to German-made electromagnetic weapons. But if the Navy could make their ships invisible to the naked eye, of course they would deny it. Now wouldn't they? Now, the fate of the Eldridge, the ship's enthusiasts may already know that there is no USS Eldridge in the Navy's current fleet. The Eldridge was sent to Greece in 1951, where the name of it was changed to HS Leon. The ship spent the next several years engaged in various Cold War missions. It was eventually decommissioned and sold off as scrap metal, and the USS Eldridge truly vanished. A ship that now exists only in memory. It was in service for 50 years before being decommissioned. Interesting. Now, the 1999 reunion, where 15 former crew members of the USS Eldridge came together in a special reunion in Atlantic City. For many, it was the first time that they had seen each other in 53 years. The crew members who gathered laughed about the stories surrounding the Philadelphia experiment and said they never took part in any top-secret projects during the time. While some crew members are annoyed by the ongoing stories, some say they had fun with the conspiracy theory over the years. One sailor goes along with it and tells people he did disappear, and so he can laugh at them until they realize he's teasing them. All 15 say they don't know why their ship has been the target of such a story, and some are openly annoyed that they keep getting questions about it. Interesting. Now, humankind has been fascinated with tales of invisibility for centuries. Pop culture is littered with heroes who can disappear and reappear in the blink of an eye. There's been an invisible man, an invisible woman, a Harry Potter with an invisibility cloak, and the very idea of being able to vanish into thin air has been tackled by countless magicians through the decades. Now, people are very fascinated by invisibility, and perhaps that is why the tale of the Philadelphia experiment exists, otherwise known as the Operation Rainbow, has endured. But it's also true that militaries around the world have been fascinated with the idea of invisibility as well. Nazi Germany was the first military power to create a stealth jet that went into the air in 1944, and it was rumored by the Nazis that they were working on other forms of invisibility, and the U.S. government very much wanted to get their hands on it. And maybe they did, after all. When the government lies, and yes, the idea of the Philadelphia experiment sounds like stuff of science fiction. For a good movie, a funny reference to a good TV show, good fodder for a rich book with mysteries. The typical Navy destroyer is a beast of a vessel that weighs 9,000 tons and measures over 500 feet long. Destroyers are armed with more than 90 missiles. They're heavy, they're huge, they're packed with firepower. Could anyone make such a thing disappear? If the government could accomplish such a feat, they'd never admit to it anyways. Some of the strangest sounding conspiracy theories about the government have actually proven to be true in later decades. And yes, the government carried out a syphilis study in which they denied medicine to hundreds. Yes, the government tested chemical weapons on its own citizens just to see what would happen. And yes, the CIA tried to train cats as spies in one failed Cold War-era project. And when you look at the story of the Philadelphia experiment through the lens of what we know now about the government, how far-fetched is it really? Now, if you're listening to this, you're on the Patreon. And I literally cannot say enough kind things to you right now. So just take every kind word that you could think of and just throw it at yourself and feel the effects of my kindness to you. And I appreciate you so much, for joining along on this journey and being a part of this, a part of this first wave of it. I'm so excited to see what this can do. And I'm so excited to connect with you guys further. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And I cannot wait to connect with you more. Have a great day.